Welcome to the New Rainmaker Podcast, a weekly show for visionary founders and team members alike to come together and share the heartfelt, the cringe, and the radically honest truths about what it's really like to build and work for some of the world's most exposed brands on the biggest internet stages. I'm your host, Veronica Romney, and after working for some of the biggest names in the online space myself, I've learned that it takes both leadership and dream team collaboration to truly scale a company to its greatest potential. You can build a business alone, but you cannot scale it on your own. And my goal on today's episode and every episode is to inspire our dreamers and empower our leaders. Make sure to follow and share my podcast with your friends and colleagues, and feel free to tag me on Instagram at vromney with your insights and ahas. Now let's make it rain on today's episode. Hey, Rainmaker family. Okay, today's podcast is actually a personal one. I invited a close friend, mentor, coach, all the titles. This is actually me and my husband's personal parenting coach. And ironically, her name is Dr. Hope, and she gives hope to so many people and families. And I invited her to this podcast, which is an entrepreneurial podcast, but I think it's super critical and necessary because I'll share some of my own stories into why my husband and I even sought out a parenting coach, because we're all about improvement, growth, personal development, getting better in all of the areas of our life. And yet, why is it that we often feel like we're failing at home? And I just wanted to invite Dr. Hope to have that conversation with me in a kind of vulnerable way and share it with each of you, because I know I'm not the only one that struggles with some of these feelings. So Dr. Hope, will you please introduce yourself to the Rainmaker community?
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you so much. My name is Hope Seidel. I'm a general pediatrician. I've been in private practice pediatrics for 21 years. And a couple of years ago, I recognized that the most powerful work I was doing in my office was really the connection that I'm making with parents, trying to help them build better wellness in their families by fueling more connection, less control, and trying to empower parents to feel more confident in their parenting. So I started also as an entrepreneur, a business called Parent with Hope, which I have done a number of things with, but I currently take private clients one-on-one. So we dive deep into your parenting to just create a more values-based, intentional path that feels right for you. I like to teach parents to sort of look more in than out. We spend so much time looking out to get all the information that we need from our parenting. And oftentimes the answers are right within you. It just needs some, available conversation to help you discover it. So I'm grateful to be here.
Well, and here's what I loved about working with you. One, you have that medical background. So in some regards, you could tell us like that is actually normal that your child does that, like mentally, biologically, like it's normal, versus like, this is your problem, which I really appreciate, because I'm a more forthcoming probably personality. And so I really appreciated your approach to how you worked with me and worked with my husband, just to be forthright, diplomatic in the process, because that's what we needed to hear. So I'll just kind of give a little context. I've invited Dr. Hope to even meet with my Rainmaker residency members, which again, we have some strong characters and really ambitious women. And so I know you've worked with some of my members as well, and they've told me this is life-changing work for them. So I'll give context to why I got to you in the first place, or what like brought me to this point of like, really, I mean, it was bad. Like, so I pride myself in thinking that I do great work, 9 to 5, classic 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Like in my profession, I have the amazing opportunity to work with a lot of different personalities in a leadership capacity. I've managed hundreds of employees. I now, consult and leadership develop other leaders and aspiring leaders and CEOs. I've taken enough assessments to know that like this is definitely my zone of genius, and this is where I thrive the most. And I love what I do. I actually genuinely like working. It doesn't drain me. I feel like that Einstein time where time just flies by. Like I feel for the most part like I have found my purpose, and it's just this bliss, which is, I mean, the goal for so many people. And I also like,
Yeah.
I really like my marriage. I love my husband. Like we've clocked in time into that as well. So like when I grade myself across the areas of my life, whether it be marriage, entrepreneurship, obviously parenthood, my husband and I joke, like we have this conversation. What's the hardest thing? Is it parenting, marriage, or is it entrepreneurship? Right. And so we came to you because even though I felt like I was doing well in some of the other areas of my life of great significance and importance, I felt like I was flunking in my parenting. Okay, so just for context sake, I have two little boys. I have a 6-year-old and an almost 9-year-old. And this is, I think I don't even really know 100% what I shared with you on our very first call, but something of the extent of like, I feel like I make progress in so many areas of my life and I do the hard work. But then when it comes to my kids, it's just like it's a version of like Groundhog Day every day in some regards. And it's really frustrating because in entrepreneurship, you can beat yourself. Or if you look at the world like I'm competing against another, great. That's a benchmark that you can, aspire to beat. Or for me, I compete with myself. I'm always trying to do a personal record, whether it was running cross country when I was in high school or now. It's like a gamification in a way where you're like always up leveling. There's always levels to achieve, unlock, do this, do that. But with kids, it's relentless. It's the anxiety, the stress, the higher than normal voice volume to get them out the door in the morning, to then also when you receive them from school, then it's the same gamut. It's the same like homework, dinner, shower, this, that, and you're just sprinting. I felt like I was always sprinting. It was a rush to get them to bed. It was a rush to get them to school. It was a rush to get, like, I'm always rushing. And I'm like, is this what this
Yeah.
is? Because I kept holding my breath for it to get better. Oh, it's because they're
Yeah.
little. Oh, it's because he's two, terrible twos. Oh, nope, horrible threes. Like it was always,
Yeah.
and I just kept waiting and waiting. And here I am, and I have a 6-year-old and almost 9-year-old. I felt like I was still waiting. And I just told my husband, I'm like, we have to do something different because I don't like this. And I'm not finding joy in motherhood like I'm finding joy in other areas of my life. And that is the complete polar opposite of my personal values. Family is number one. And yet I wasn't enjoying my family life. And then comes hope.
Yeah.
Do you remember our first meeting?
I do. I do. You're in a lot of pain, and it's super common when patients and clients come to me when they're often just struggling with one or more of their children, and the movie that they had in their head about the way it was supposed to be is so very different than the way it is now. And part of that is the error, right? That we have a vision of the way it's supposed to be. And for your entrepreneurs and people who are strong professional women, there's a level of perfectionism that we thrive on that allows us to be successful in our careers, which does not apply to parenting. There's no way to do that perfectly. And almost accepting that means accidentally sometimes you can make that mean something about you, that I'm not doing it well. And then there's also like this urgency to get it right, or a time frame in which it has to be done. It's like there's a certain amount of time you're waiting for it to get better, and then it doesn't, so you make that mean something about you or your kid. And then finally, like, you don't get the feedback that you get in your business in the same way that you do in your parenting. Your children are like, I'm so grateful for that discipline strategy you gave me. I really feel like I've elevated myself to a better kind of human being. Like, they don't give you that kind of feedback. And all of those things make what already is just a challenging time trickier.
Yeah, this morning, James, my youngest, he's like, Mom, can I have your iPad? I'm like, no device time. He's like, you don't love me. I'm like, okay, okay. I don't
Right.
even, what do you
Right.
say to that? But, you just kind of chuckle.
No.
But let's talk about the time thing. And this, there's a lot of gold. And you guys need to probably listen to this podcast a couple times. I already know it's coming because this is just how it is working with Dr. Hope. But this is something that Scott and I've talked to ourselves. We literally have it's not there anymore, but it used to be. We have this little wood timer thing. It's like where you take out 13, 12, like you can take out the numbers. And so Scott had it on our bedroom dresser, and it was the number of like Christmases or holidays that we have left with the boys before like they're 18 and out of the house, so to speak, out of the nest. So, if that's the case. But I had to tell you that made me more nervous because I was like,
That's the worst idea ever.
uh-huh.
Yes.
I told myself this is something that we would tell ourselves. This was a very common language in the house to be like, we have between 0 and 18 to make them the best human beings that they can be.
Yes.
Like we
Yes.
have only a very, short allotted time to make sure they don't turn out to be narcissistic jerks. Or I know another thing that I would often do, which again, this is normal. I understand that now, but it still hurts me and it definitely negatively impacts my parenting style. Is I would say things like I have between 0 and 18 to make sure they don't end up like ex family member.
Yes.
Because I witnessed my parents having 3 children and we were all radically different, same parents, but radically different children. And some are harder and then some are not. And so I had this panic or which would get expounded when my one family would be like, oh, your son's just like so and so. I'm like, we don't talk about Bruno. Like we don't talk about Bruno. But that's what would happen. And I would start to like the fear, and I'm not even an anxious person. I don't struggle with anxiety for them, like, but I would get very anxious around parenting more than any other arena in my life.
Yeah. And imagine the burden on you, but not only on your kids to
Mm-hmm.
sort of, squash that movie you have in your head about the way their current results are going to turn them into something. We have to be really, really careful about recognizing that what our kids' actions and results are currently doesn't necessarily mean it's where they're going to be when they get all grown up. And when we're in this kind of catastrophic space of parenting, where we make it mean it's a family member, or we even see things in ourselves that we really hate, right? Then it's so easy for us to spiral, as you did when we worked together, and create so much urgency in getting it right, which just feeds into the difficulty in your parenting, because you really need to be patient with kids. They're on a process. They're not, this isn't a goal that we're trying to get to, right? We're trying to create a process for them. And the process is where the goal is. It's not the end point. We don't even know what that's going to be.
Well, that's the hard part, right? Because going back to like the gamification of other areas of my life, like we married ideally in my hopes of hopes. Me and my husband are gonna be, we're gonna be 80 something years old on the porch and like rocking chairs together and like notebook style death. Like, right? Like that's and so the milestones are like, certain years in your anniversary dates and certain like, okay, we made it past the 7 year itch, right? So there's certain milestones. In business, there's certain revenue thresholds. Okay, I hit this number, or now I hit this number, like, right? So there in some in a lot of the other ways of life, you can measure yourself, or you can at least, it's like a board game in front of you, the game of life. With kids, it's not to say that there isn't milestones, because obviously they have the school system that does that for us. We're going from kindergarten to third grade, da 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 da. But what you just shared about the process, I mean, to compare it to like the business world, it's like always working on your SOPs. Everybody loves SOPs, said no one. No one likes SOPs. We do it because that's what we're told to do, but no one actually enjoys making standard operating procedures. And I feel like in my house, I'm
Yeah.
constantly making SOPs and it's exhausting.
Yeah, yeah. And just to reiterate what I said, I mean, when we're so focused on our kids' goals, who they're going to be, whether
Mm-hmm.
they're going to get into college, if they're going to be narcissists, whatever it is, you know, and we'd forget to focus on the process of who they're becoming as
Uh-huh.
they're achieving whatever their goals are, right? Because their path may not match the journey that we may have had for them. When we focus on goals, we miss teaching the value of the
Mm-hmm.
process. And really, that's where all the juice is, the parts of your business and the parts of your marriage that have really been so amazing. The reason they're successful isn't because you knew you were going to be an amazing entrepreneur. It's because of all of the crap in the middle that it took for you to get there and the wisdom that came from that process. And we don't hold our kids to that same standard. We just want them to get better quicker. And we can't control other people. And so that feels even worse.
Yeah, because it's different for your employees who are not your children. Like, not to say that you don't care about your staff the way that you would, like your family. There's like a kind of like your professional work family, and then of course there's your home life and your home family. But your kids are literally walking pieces of you on the outside. Like they should have your DNA. So when they don't live up to your standards or your expectations, it absolutely makes you feel like garbage. To me.
Yeah. Yeah. But the thought error in that moment we talked, a lot about is that, that we have expectations for them, right? That's where our disappointment lies,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it makes perfect sense that we would have them. We want to have a certain family and whatnot. The goal in parenting is not to change your kids or to change yourself. It's to change when I'm coaching a parent, I'm teaching them to change or consider what thoughts are shaping their parenting and decide if they like them or not, right? When you're in a leadership position in your business, you're trusting, right? That you are going to know what to do in certain situations when your employees do what they're going to do, right? And there's this level of confidence that you create in that environment. If your employees don't show up in the way that you expect them to, you know what you're going to do, right? But it's not like you can fire your kids, right? Or it's not like you can not give your kids a bonus, right? And so that, I think, that logic is still super helpful when you use your leadership strategies to sort of not control the people who you're working with, but to motivate them to elevate themselves to be the best version of themselves. That's really what you're hoping for. And we can transfer so many of those amazing skills, and you and I've talked about this, into the way that you parent. It's just you have to reframe the outcome as not your responsibility.
Yeah. Yeah. No, solid. You work with a lot of powerhouse women and busy couples, ambitious
Yeah.
households. What would you
Yes.
say are some of the most common themes? And I know that I naively came to you with like, give me a tip for handling miles. Give me a strategy, because that's how we think, right? Strategy, tactic, tip. And I know that's not how you work, which is the genius of what you do. But when you're working with individuals like myself, my husband, or that type of busyness, what are some of the most common complaints, fears, frustrations that you often encounter in those first calls?
Well, yeah, that's my sweet spot. You're my ideal client for sure. I mean, I just love introspective, thoughtful parents who really want to better understand. A lot of topics typically come up. The first topic that comes up most of all is disrespect. I have a lot of parents who feel that their kids are not being respectful. Okay. And so I could go on a tirade about this for an hour, but that comes up all the time, men and women, right? Why do our kids need to be respectful, and what their behavior means to parents in terms of disrespect, right? And they should listen to us and they should speak with us with to certain words because we don't teach our children to behave in that certain way, right? And I think there's a very big confusion among people who are used to being respected in the workplace, right? Or respected in their jobs, or who have a high value of respect for themselves. There's a confusion between children respecting you and obedience. Okay. And it's important not to conflate the two. Obedience is an action that is anchored in control. And compliance, which is what we really want with our kids, is something that's anchored in connection, right? And respect that our kids do or don't have for us is a feeling. We can't give our kids respect for us. We can't make them respect us, even if culturally that's the way our family works, right? The definition of a respect is a positive feeling or an action that we show someone who we consider to be important and hold in high regard. But you don't get to decide how someone else feels about you. And so parents get into the space of control of wanting to elicit respect instead of showing up in a way that models respectful connection. And so there's a lot of difficulty in some of my parents who are used to that. And then also just a lot of difficulty watching their kids in pain is probably the most common thing that I talk about. And not wanting our kids to be sad, not wanting them to have difficulty. Many of you, I have a couple clients who I work with who are entrepreneurs because you've overcome so very much and you don't want your kids to have that problem, all the things that made things difficult for you. And then resentment that you might feel because you're thinking your kids should know how easy they have it or how hard things are, all that stuff. And I talk a lot about allowing our kids to fail and what we make that mean about us as parents, that we're not doing a certain kind of job. I don't know, that's probably all over the place, but that's kind of that tends to be the most common reasons parents come in, is they're lacking control or wanting respect.
That's exactly what it is, 100%. And certain kids will have certain personalities, and children will trigger that more so than others. Like you can have one kid who's extremely obedient and the other one is like
Yeah,
my oldest, bless his heart. He's like a walking, just a force of nature. And he
yeah,
always has been
yeah,
and will always be. And I remember one of the things that you told me very early on in some of our sessions that, you called it and I guess this resonated with me because I use this analogy a lot in my leadership development program as well, where I believe in developing talent from within more than anything else. So like
mm,
taking somebody that you already have
yeah,
rapport
yeah,
with and trust with, and then giving them the tools, the education, the support to become the leader, the whatever you need them to be for the company's growth and future, right? So I'm a big proponent of like pouring into someone's existing flower pot, and your goal is to find the people that will just soar with that extra love, sunlight and attention and nourishment. But then, so when you told me in one of our sessions, you said, listen, what if, let's just go with this, what if your children were already predestined in some regards? Like they're already predestined seed. And so
Yep.
instead of spending all of your parenting and all of your anxiety around having your cilantro having your cactus not be a cactus, what if you just honored your cactus the way that it is because it's already predestined, and just made it the best cactus it can be versus comparing your cactus to the cilantro across the street? Do you remember
Yeah.
that?
And the other topic, yeah, totally. And the other topic that I brought up to you in that regard is that the tricky part about parenting, right, is that you don't even know you have a cactus
Yes.
sometimes, right? You just plant the seeds and they like have no label and you don't even know what they are.
Correct.
And then you're watching them grow and you're guessing for like the first 10 years of their parenting, maybe more, like what does this thing need
Mm-hmm.
even? And so you look at your neighbors and you're like, well, they're growing something and that is doing amazing. Maybe I'll use some of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the farther away you get from the flower you're growing, trying to outsource that wisdom, the less attention you're paying to the flower you have. And then you're not making those necessary adjustments as a parent to really figure out what your child needs. And then if you're wishing that you're growing something different and you're not honest with yourself about that, like I wish my child was easier.
Yes.
I wish like I wish my child was more beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever story that you're not even aware you believe,
Mm-hmm.
which is not a problem. All of us have that vulnerability, right?
Mm-hmm.
Wishing our kids would be a certain way. Then you're also teaching your kids by accident that their worth is only measured by what you think, as opposed to really honoring their innate perfection, which is already predestined in the seeds that they are. And when you can really get that concept, you will change everything about the way that you see your kids.
We'll be back with this interview right after the commercial break. Did you know that I have a free Rainmaker hiring kit? Skip the formal recruiting process and learn how to source Rainmaker applicants that are already connected to you. I'll show you how to turn a walking testimonial into a rockstar team member for free. Head to veronicarami.com or click the link in my show notes to get your hands on the free Rainmaker hiring kit. Now let's get back to the show. It's hitting me again. I have on you're listening to the podcast, so you can't see this, but in my office, I have 2 glass doors that I like walk out of, exiting my office to the rest of my home. So I work from home, right? So it's really important to like have dedicated spaces that trigger different parts of my brain to activate. So when I'm transitioning from, work Veronica and, CEO Veronica to mom Veronica or wife Veronica or all the other things, all the other titles and capacities that I have to do, I have a little post-it that you shared with me, and it's still, I actually have 2 post-its, and we'll talk about it. I see these post-its every day as I leave this office into the rest of my home. And the first one says, lead with compassionate curiosity and focus on feelings, not behaviors. Those were
Yes.
some of the biggest game changers that you ever gave me in some of our sessions. And let's start with the
Yes.
compassionate curiosity, because you said it
Yeah.
perfectly. I birthed a child in the hospital, and somebody said, put it in a car seat and goodbye. Like, there's no manual. There's literally, and obviously, how I'm raising my child. First of all, I'm the mother that I am, not my mom, even though she's great, but I'm
Right.
still my own version of my mom, a mother that I want to be.
Yes.
I have a child that has never been known by anyone else in the world except for me. And it's also a new generation with different things, right? Totally different society and societal pressures and things like that. So even though I have really great examples before me, and like you said, whether it's the neighbor that's being a great role model to you, a mentor, or you're sourcing that from your own family, parents, your situation, you're unique, your child's unique, and no one gives you a flippin' manual, not from above. No, it's not, there's nowhere. So like, you're right. I didn't even know that Miles was a cactus. I didn't even know what he was for so long, and I'm still figuring it out. But that's why leading with compassionate curiosity is such a game changer. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind when you say to me that you were giving your child, that's also really helpful for what we just finished talking about, is that when they gave you your son, you loved him immediately and he had done nothing to deserve that. And that feeling that you have the minute you have your child, and the love is just overwhelming. It is what worth feels like. That's the worth that we can assign to our kids forever, is that they do nothing to receive our love. Our love is totally unconditional. And that if you've fallen out of that pattern, you can always think back to that day and remember how that felt so that you can practice it over and over again. But compassionate curiosity is really about really wondering what our children's behavior, and this is going to kind of lead into what you want to talk about next, but wondering what our child's behavior means. Remember, they're just like a ball of neurons at this age. The frontal lobe is not fully developed, executive functioning, all the things that all of you do so amazingly in your entrepreneurial jobs and as you work, right? Like, is not even built and finished until 26. And so the standards we use by accident with our kids are based on our lens of the way that we have made sense of the world in our grown-up brains. And when you're curious, like, I wonder what that is about. What is that behavior about? What is that sadness about? You not only access curiosity and understanding with your kids, you can seek empathy, you can have connection, which, as I alluded to earlier, results in compliance. And you teach your kids how to figure out what they're feeling because you're curious on what their behavior means. And so when we think we know what everything our kids are doing means or is going to turn out to be, we make a lot of decisions for their current state and their future state that aren't appropriate and steal that awareness from them. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. No, I mean, I just being fully vulnerable with everybody who's listening. I was parenting from a deep place of fear.
Hmm. Most do. Most do. What was your fear about? Yeah.
I think, and we've talked about this before too, because like I've given a lot of what we talk about in our sessions is I'll give you a scenario. Okay, we were on vacation with our friends and they were driving me crazy. Like I'll give you a situation that like made me feel a particular way, and then you'll help me deconstruct why. Well, why did it make you feel a particular way, right? But I remember one of the more powerful sessions that I had was just like this realization that I was fear projecting always. So if my kid had a very what I would deem selfish moment at school, or was
Yeah.
crass or disrespectful to the teacher, the principal. I mean, heaven forbid, right? Like if we got a, so if I saw him not share with somebody in at church, or if I got a note from school that he was being disrespectful and, like lippy, or so regardless, right? Like I would instantly go, oh no, he doesn't share. He's really selfish he's a selfish person. And I would start, I mean, that's some really hard, I'm just being very honest with you guys. Like I'm full disclosure here. Like I love my children more than life itself, but I was so scared that him not sharing his cookie with his little brother who will share everything, will literally take the shirt off his back, where Miles would be like, no, I will never do something like that for you. I'm like, oh no, he's going to grow up to be, because again, I work with these people. I every single day, especially in my corporate environment, I work with the guy who's selfish. I work with the person who's a narcissistic prick. I work with these. So I instantly we go, oh no, Miles didn't do this thing and he's 8. He's going to be 28, 38, 48 doing the same thing. And I know what that looks like in the corporate world. I know what that looks like in the adult world. Oh no. And I would instantly transport to the future in complete fear and paranoia.
Yeah. You believe everything you think. Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely true. That is how it's going to happen. Yeah. And that's my job, right? Is to help you be like, is it possible that that's actually not true at all? How could that not be true? How could it be just perfect that he does that? How could it make perfect sense? What skill do you want to build as a value in your home that might help him learn that skill, right? Learn how to be different. Could it be when your kids behaviors a certain way that they're tired, or that they are embarrassed, or they are frustrated and they lack the language at whatever age they are to really
Right.
communicate that? That's our responsibility
Right.
as a leader, is in parenting, is really to sort of identify where the gaps are and not make that mean a failure on either of our parts, but notice as a leader, our job is to help facilitate their
Right.
understanding.
Goes back to my little this post-it sticky note number 2, which is to focus on feelings and not behavior. So I see the behavior of him not sharing or not being generous or not being considerate, and I instantly start
Yeah.
freaking out about the kind of crap adult that he could be if I don't course correct, remold this Play-Doh ASAP. And then you're like, well, but hold on a minute. what if he doesn't want to share? Do you want to share everything in your life? I'm like, no. Like, no.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a very generous person, but there's moments where, like, my husband asked me to share my food. I'm like, but I'm starving. Can we ask me like 3/4 of the way into my meal? Like, there's moments where I too I'm not the most generous human being in the world. And so, like, focusing on his feelings as opposed to the behaviors that I deem bad, right? These are labels: bad behavior, good
Right.
behavior, acceptable, unacceptable, right? It's like this
Yeah.
filtering system at all times. And so, focusing on Miles's feelings, which is so, here's the irony, you guys, and maybe this relates to you if you're listening, if you are a podcast host yourself. I literally, by profession, interview human beings on their feelings that drive their behaviors on this podcast. And yet I was
Yeah.
not playing podcast host to my children's feelings at all.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. And when you see, you said two things that I wanted to comment on, but when you see your kids' behavior always as an expression of an underlying feeling, and you make it a priority as a parent to help identify that, right? Oh God, there's so many amazing things that happens, but this is the thing to remember is what is rewarded is repeated and what is punished is avoided, right? And so this is why it's critical not to punish all of your kids' behaviors that are triggering for you. Because when you do that and you don't take the time and curiosity to figure out what that means, what your child receives is that how I feel is bad. And they get punished for how they feel, which is what creates adults who can't access their feelings in a safe way, who can't adequately express what they need in a safe way. And when you make room for kind of a crappy behavior that they might have that might be totally inconsistent the way they speak to you with like how you want to have a value in your home, and you're willing to say, okay, I'm just gonna, I don't really like the way that happened, but there has to be something going on that is a bigger priority for me to understand. You won't continue to see that behavior because you're not modeling it and you're not going to tolerate it as a boundary, but you will teach them how to do it differently, which is the goal, right? Is not to hit when you're angry, but to say exactly what you mean and what's making you struggle.
Yeah, spot on. I'm so glad you brought up the word boundaries, because one of the things that I was also very guilty of, and you lovingly called me out, which again, I love your style. I love your frankness with me, because you hold the juxtaposition of these attributes where, like, you're both super kind but also frank, and it's both are I think versions of kindness, that, like, you give it to me how I need to be given it to, too. And then when I'm like crying
Yeah.
hysterically, you're very soft with me, which I appreciate. But, like, let's talk
Mhm.
about boundaries, because one of the things that you very lovingly called me out for was like, man, you're just like blowing a lot of oxygen on that fire. As a parent, kitchen's already hot, but because I'm triggered, because I'm fear casting, because I'm doing all the things I'm not supposed to do in a moment of weakness, or I'm just dog tired at the end of the day. So, like, my reserves for
Yeah.
patience and compassionate curiosity are not the highest it could be after like 9 Zoom call
Yeah.
type of day. I add oxygen to the fire. So if the kids are fighting and then I'm yelling at them, yelling at each other, this is just like a vicious cycle of no win, and I'm constantly adding oxygen to the fire. And you told me that. You're like, you're adding oxygen to the fire. I'm like, well, then what am I supposed to do when they don't eat their dinner? You're like, hold on. This is the beautiful thing about boundaries. When a boundary, it's not like you like let go of parenting. You can have set expectations within the home. Like, we like manners. That's important to us in this family. We have family values. We go to church, right? Like, so, but
Yeah.
when things happen and a boundary is not honored, you already know what you're going to do, Veronica. So why add oxygen or a heightened emotional state when you already know what's going to happen, and you can calmly deliver said result of a boundary being, not honored. And I was like, because I was responding in emotion all the time.
Yeah. A lot of people have confusion around boundaries and
Mm-hmm.
punishments with their kids,
Mm-hmm.
and they spend a lot of time punishing. And I listen, one of the reasons I'm really good at being both frank and empathic is because I also am a single parent of two teenagers, and I don't do this perfectly all the time either. Like, and my kids who will listen to me coach people on and off in the house are like, are happy to remind me of times when I do that poorly. We're all triggered by our kids, right? That just is There's no off road, there's no off ramp to hard parenting. Like if you're waiting for that to happen, that's just not a thing. So you can just let that thought go. But boundaries are what you're going to do when your children does what they're going to do. Okay. So when you're having an argument about mealtime, you're pissed off because your kids won't eat what you want them to eat. Okay, you're doing their job. They get to decide what they're going to do. And then you know when they don't eat a certain amount, or when they don't eat what's on their plate, or when they don't eat in a certain amount of time, or if they get up and down, or whatever the story is. Mealtime's a common place to practice boundaries. It's the best as far as I'm concerned. You know exactly what you're going to do, but it doesn't mean that your kid is going to show up and be like, you know what? Yeah, I really needed that boundary, or that they're going to like it. Any boundary you have with your family, any boundary you have with a friend, right? They're rarely well accepted. But boundary work that's done well in any relationship, which I'm sure you know, creates connection because people know exactly what to expect from you. And then when you are empty at the end of a long CEO day, when you are really empty at the a zillion Zoom calls, you don't have to access from your crappy part of your brain what to do because you're already depleted. Your bucket is empty, right? You already have a plan ahead of time when it's possible on what you're going to do when they do what they're going to do, which just can be neutral. It doesn't even have to have drama. And I think I gave you the example of when my son started driving and he had a curfew. Like he gets to come home after the curfew. I know exactly what I'm going to do. He can't go out the next night if he comes home late. Am I disappointed sometimes when he chooses not to come home on time? Sure. Am I sad for him when I have to hold my boundary and it's tricky? Yes. But I know what I'm going to do so that we don't have to have any drama about it. We've talked about it ahead of time. And that's an
Oh
example.
my gosh, it's the best. Because again, I do this all the time in my workplace. Literally,
Yeah.
like, okay, what happens if the launch doesn't go well? What happens when we don't hit our numbers? Like, I know protocols. I know what plan B is. Okay, we're going to do a plot twist. Like, I do this so often and I guide other people in doing this so often. And yet I didn't do, or I didn't even think that all of that
Yeah.
experience or skill or my 10,000 hours that I've clocked in mastery was transferable to the degree that you've helped me see. Like, and you've said that to me. You're like, Veronica, I don't know exactly what it is that you do, but you really seem like you know your stuff. So are you telling me that none of that's transferable to your children? I'm like, damn it, Hope, you did it again. Like, nailed it. Like, yeah, you're right. Like there's nothing more that like again in coaching. I came to you, give me tools, give me new tactics, give me new strategies, and you're like very politely said, there's nothing more that you need to have to be the kind of parent that your child deserves and that you deserve to be for yourself. And I was like, wow, because I'm always looking for more.
Yeah, and the also thing is that we talked a lot about, and that I think is important for your listeners to understand, is that you can't access a plan. You can't read a book and get a good parenting idea if you still have a ton of crappy thoughts about your
Yep.
kids. If you think your kids should be a different way, or
Yep.
they should be respectful, or you have a whole manual for how they have to behave, or you have a whole idea of everything that's going to happen if they have the wrong result, or whatever it is, the action means something about the quality of your parenting. Then no matter what you try and access from that place is going to be not effective. Kids have superpowers. They pick up on all of the ways we show up. And we can have all this perfect language like, it's totally fine if you did that. Or, let's go. I'm super patient. You can come up with all this fabulous language and scenarios to say, but if you're still living in thoughts that are really unproductive for your parenting, not only won't you be able to do it authentically, but you also won't be able to do it consistently.
Boom. And I think that's the game here. Here I am using that. I have to be very careful with that language, but that is the thing about parenting, because I feel like on a daily basis I'm giving my kids performance improvement plans. I'm giving them bibs. And that
Yes.
sucks because when you do it in the workplace, when you put a team member on a performance improvement plan, it's like a sad day in the workplace. We'll transfer that to like everyday life in your home without understanding the power of boundaries and always going to like punishment pips in a way, right? Punishment improvement plans. Oh my gosh, I heard a quote that I wanted to share with you. I'm like, I think Dr. Hope would approve this quote. It said, rules without relationship equals rebellion.
Yes.
Rules without relationship, right? As a foundation just equals flat out rebellion.
Or rules without relationship and connection
Hmm.
leads to people also leads to people pleasing,
Yeah, we
right?
talked
Because
about
you
that.
might actually have a kid that does the rules and that makes you feel like you're doing it right because they're listening. But the truth
Yeah.
is, a lot of kids who are doing the right thing in quotes, because you can't see me, are afraid,
Hmm.
right? Or they don't, or they want to take responsibility for
Hmm.
your feelings. And that's a whole nother podcast. But, managing your kids' feelings when you execute your boundaries is another hour.
Well, the one more thing that I knew that I wanted to share that was so insightful for me, and like you said, that we could go off on these tangents and like go even deeper in any one of these topics. And if you're personally struggling in your parenting and just need an empathetic, forthright coach, please contact Dr. Hope immediately. I couldn't endorse you more. I do it all the time, anyways, with my friends. I'm like, you need Dr. Hope. Her name is Hope. Like, it's the best. But the one thing that I want to share before we kind of wrap it up that was also extremely impactful for me was I would come back to you. So we'd meet every other week or every, in between sessions. And then I remember because I'm an A+ student and you're my coach, AK my teacher. So I want to please you. I'd come back to the next session like, oh my gosh, listen to this. Miles told me that he loves me, or Miles told me this, or Miles said this really, really sweet thing. And I'm coming to you to tell you that like my child thinks I'm an awesome mom. And you're like, wait a
Mm,
minute. Does that need to happen for you to think that you're an awesome mom? Do you remember that session? I don't know if you remember that. Do you
yes,
remember what you said
I
to me?
totally do. I don't remember exactly what I said to you,
Mm-hmm.
but being a really excellent parent is a decision that you make
Mm-hmm.
in your brain. It doesn't come from your child's reaction. If you're always using the way your child shows up in the world as a metric for how you're going to decide you're parenting well, you're not only going to be exhausted, but you're going to always feel inadequate. And, I think I shared with you that there are a lot of thoughts that inform my confidence in my parenting, but I choose thoughts that make me feel confident. One of those thoughts is that really amazing parents mess up all the time and they're accountable. And so when I mess up, I don't make that mean anything's wrong with me. I just assume that that's what really great
Right.
parents do. I also think really great mothers work. Not everybody agrees with me about that. But for me, that is a thought that really fuels my ability to go to work, feel good about it, and stay at home. And so you get to decide you're awesome anytime you want. I mean, not when you're beating your kid, but in general, like there's a thought process that comes from you deciding what makes you good. And
Mm-hmm.
if perfection is on the list, if your kid being amazing is on the list,
Mm-hmm.
you're outsourcing a result that you can't always control,
Mm-hmm.
and you're always going to feel like you're not enough, which is optional.
Mm. I can't tell you what that meant to me because, like, we talked about this before. You said, Veronica, like, do you think that the best moms just don't work? And I'm like, no, I don't think that at all. And you're like, okay, then. So why do you have to have your level of motherhood be defined by anything else, including your children? I was like, whoa. That one was because
Yeah.
again, I don't, my mother or my mother-in-law or anyone on the outside or anybody that I go to church with, or like, they don't get to decide if I'm being a great mom by how I like show up or if I work, if I don't work. Like I'm like, I've done a lot of good work around that, like working mom guilt. Like I feel like I've slayed that dragon to a really big part. But then when you told me like even your children don't get to
Yeah.
define your worth as a mother, that one was the big one for me because I words of affirmation are my love language. And it's kind of what Brene Brown
Yeah.
says, like, don't tell people you don't give a you do. You get to decide who you give a about. And so I'm like, well, I care. I give
Yes.
that my children affirm me. So when you're like, but even if your children didn't affirm you, you still have the luxury and the agency to know that you're doing a great job for yourself and only for yourself.
Yeah. And that's not to abdicate responsibility
Right.
from having, an algorithm in your home that you want to live by or that you want to work towards.
Right.
But one way for you to catch yourself if you're doing this own judgment in your own home is to notice how you judge other kids and decide their parents are doing a good or a bad
Mm.
job. This is super common where you're like, how did that kid get so polite? That parent did an amazing job. Or what happened to that kid who was a drug addict? I wonder what they did wrong. And I'm not saying that there isn't some truth to the way a family dynamic contributes to sort of a children's upbringing, because that's what this podcast has been all about. But just notice if you make it mean
Mhm.
something about the parent. Because the truth is that lots of amazing parents have kids that make terrible choices, and lots of really, really challenging parents who are really struggling with their own stuff and unable to show up for their kids have extremely successful, by however you define
Mm.
success, which is another podcast too, children. And so when you're judging others, it's a really good noticing, like, I think that's where my judgment is coming from me. I want other people to think that I'm doing it well.
100%. And I remember you shared that with me, and then it made me click because I had the opportunity to work for Tony Robbins and Dean Graziosi. But one of the things that Tony Robbins says all the time, because he had an abusive mother, and this is something that he shares very publicly, he's like, had she been the mother that I wanted her to be, I never would have become the man that I needed to be. And
that gives me the chills. I love that.
Oh my gosh. And I shared that with my best friend, Adrian. We talk about this all the time. Like had all of our children had the hallmark family life, and to your point, great family dynamics don't always produce the greatest. I mean, like, human beings are human beings. These are predestined seeds. So even if you did everything by the book that you think is the right way of doing it, you can't control the future. So like, and I think it's a control thing. And what you told Adrian, you told me one time was like, I think a lot of parents wrap control with the wrapping paper that just says help. I'm helping my kid, but really
it's a fancy kind of help.
Yeah. And anyways, yes. If had your parents or had your mom and Tony, like, right, had my mom been the mother that I wanted her to be, I wouldn't have turned out to be the man that I'm meant to be. And I think that goes for all of us, and
yes. I mean, for sure. Your inadequacies as a parent are a guidebook for your kids on how to survive the world where there are plenty of people that are going to show up in a way that isn't optimal for them. I mean, if you think about, like, even the negative parts of your parenting are preparing your kids for the 50-50 of life, where the whole world is not going to show up curating some perfectly beautiful, by the book, intentional, gorgeous life. Like, that's just not the way the world works.
Mic drop. Oh my gosh. Okay. Dr. Hope. We have talked for hours and hours on end because you're
hours. We could do forever.
You are my parenting coach, and you are literally, for me and my husband, a godsend. I don't even know what we would do had we not worked with you. Honestly, it was like that transformative for my entire future. Not even, yes, we came to you for parenting, but the things that you taught me about myself have transcended in all categories of my life. So I just want to thank you profoundly.
I'm grateful for the opportunity. I've enjoyed it.
Okay. So how do people, and I know that you don't, I want everybody to work with you. So how does this happen? How can people get a hold of you?
So probably the easiest way to find me is on my website, which is, you're probably going to put in the show notes, but it's www.parentwithhope.com. And they can also reach me via my email, parentwithhope@gmail.com. I take one-on-one clients. I'm going part-time in January in my pediatric practice. So I actually have opened up another couple of days during the day to sort of broaden this part of my next chapter. I'm super, super excited to heal families in this different way. And anybody can reach me either one of those places. I would love it.
Yes. And yes. We'll drop all the links, all the things to get a hold of you. If this is something that resonated with you, it doesn't have to feel this way. Like, you don't have to feel bad about yourself and how you show up in your parenting and then feel good about yourself in other areas. You can actually do something about that with the right person by your side. So thank you, Dr. Hope, for joining us on today's Rainmaker podcast. Thanks for listening to the Rainmaker podcast. We believe you can't get real results or have real relationships that last without being real first. If you resonated with today's episode, leave us a review so we can keep serving up the truth and tips that help you become the empowered leader that I know that you are. And always head over to veronicarami.com to check out all the free resources I have for you and the show notes from this episode. Until next time, my friends.